Hello, and welcome to the Still to Be Determined podcast, the podcast that follows up on topics from the YouTube channel Undecided with Matt Farrell. I'm Sean Farrell. I'm Matt's older brother. I'm a writer, and I'll be asking the questions, and the answerer will be Matthew, and Matthew's going to say hello.
Hello.
Before we get into the episode, just a few reminders about ways you can support the podcast. You can, of course, just follow. You can subscribe. You can comment. You can share us with your friends. And you can also visit stilltbd.fm. There's a link on that page. You can throw some pennies in the jar. Any kind of support, whatever it is you're able to make, is appreciated. Now, some comments on our last episode. This, of course, was molds.
You had fun with that title.
I did have fun with that title. Sean Connor wrote, with mycelium stocks, I haven't found any. Are there any companies that you know of?
I got that question a few times, even in email, and it's like, I don't know offhand. It's
right.
I don't think there's any publicly traded that I know of.
It may be a little bit in the offing. The technology may be too young. Mm-hmm. Rotten Meat, interesting username. Rotten Meat wrote, still haven't heard anything about the allergen and toxicity concerns. Fungus doesn't have a good history of living next to animals. And that's quite a claim to make when your username is Rotten Meat. But anyway, it is a good question.
It is a good question.
And I wondered if you had any information about that. Is this a process where the baking effectively destroys any allergen aspect?
It is not alive. It is an inert thing. So it's not going to cause allergies. Doesn't mean that if you try to eat it, you might not have a reaction.
Right.
But it's perfectly safe because it is dead. It's not growing. It's kind of just a thing that's just going to be there. If it starts to rot,
so it's used in
decompose,
packaging or a building material. The anticipation is it's not going to be a problem. But
correct.
As you said, if you're eating mycelium bacon, if you're allergic to certain types of fungus,
correct.
there could be a problem there.
Yeah, if you're ingesting it in some fashion. Yeah.
Right. Sebastian King wrote, one great thing they could do is give a percentage discount money back tax discount if you bring your own plastic bag to the shop. This is in response to our brief discussion about things like one of the ways that New York City and other places around the country and around the world have removed plastic waste is to actually make certain types of plastic packaging illegal. And here in the city, they did actually try something similar to a money back if you recycled bags, and it just didn't work. They've tried programs like that, and what ends up happening, I think, is a little bit comparable to what happens with like recyclable cans, soda cans, beer cans, bottles, and things like that. Here in the city in particular, people just start to incorporate the money that you would get back for returning those things as part of the cost. Mm-hmm. They stop interpreting it as an incentive to take these things back to the store and recycle them that way. And so they become a thing, and I do this myself. I just put it into a recycling bag, or in some cases, in places where recycling programs aren't as robust as they are here in the city, they just throw them away. And then you end up with a secondary tier economy, which is people who go through your recycling and your garbage looking for those things that you yourself haven't taken back to the recycling centers. So a lot of those things do end up getting recycled, but the program isn't an enough incentive for the person who it's supposed to be, which is the consumer. It's one of those places where Matt's pointing out in a couple of videos that making the producer of an item responsible for its recycling is effective.
Yeah.
And replacing products with more biodegradable products is effective. But the current system that we have in place isn't effective or efficient. Also, when you consider the recycling of those plastics doesn't actually, and you've talked about this before, doesn't actually work, doesn't actually end up in new products.
No. The recycling system is basically broken. And most of us don't recognize it because we put our stuff in a recycling bin and then it gets taken away each week. And we're like, yeah, I did my job. And it's like, yeah, but that's still ending up in a landfill because it's actually not getting recycled.
Right.
So it's, yeah.
It's in some levels just PR.
It's a lot of PR. The plastics industry did a really good job with the recycling stuff.
Then a couple of quick comments on some of the tangential things that we talked about in the last episode. One of the things we touched on was the diamond industry. We talked about basically the diamond industry being a industry that appears to be hoarding a thing that is not all that much rarer than other materials, but by hoarding them, they're keeping the price jacked up.
Yeah.
And Hayes wrote, there's actually a warrant out for the De Beers arrest in the United States because they're considered a monopoly. So that's an interesting bit on that. And then the final comment, which isn't about any of the content of our discussion, and it also will be a completely confusing comment to anybody who listens to us as a podcast only. But Jacobus von Tonder wrote, Sean, the lighting and video upgrade, it has been determined as massively better. And to our YouTube viewers, hey, this is me on a better quality video and lighting rig. And this is all the result of basically I have benefited. It's probably been for 25 years now from a brother who is the tech guy, and he just passes things on to me that I say, all right, this is mine now. And Matt made the very, very good observation when I recently purchased a new computer, that my new computer, even though it's brand new, and I was very excited to get it, very excited to start using it, had a piece of crap camera. So
I would say it had a potato as a camera.
Right. So he quickly jumped into action as tech guy, and I started receiving Amazon packages with all sorts of equipment, which took me a little while to figure out. But once I did, this is now my smiling face. So I do look better. And the lighting, while I look fantastic, generates a good bit of heat, which here in early July in New York City, right at the end of what has been one of the hottest weeks that we've had at the end of June, and it's now 100% humidity. This light is basically slowly baking me. So I hope all of our listeners...
Welcome to my world, Sean.
Yeah, I hope all of our listeners and our viewers enjoy watching me slowly blister and then pass out.
Let me just say, when I record an episode, the air condition gets shut off, and then I'm surrounded by basically like 5 lights. Mm-hmm. So I'm slowly like baking as I do an episode. By the end of the episode, whoo boy.
I'm surprised that the coloring of your shirts that you've chosen is smart.
Yeah.
So that by the end of the video, you don't just have huge rings underneath your armpits. So on to today's episode. And we're going to be taking a look at Matt's most recent episode, which was Exploring Modular Homes. Cheapest path to net zero? ?
There it is.
It's on June 29th, 2021. And before we talk about that, this is the episode that you posted this past week. And then shortly thereafter, you posted that you have now passed 500,000 subscribers on YouTube.
Yeah.
Which is... Yeah, let me just say, that's a boggling number of people to pay attention to you. And congratulations. It's well-deserved. You've put a lot of work and time and effort into your channel. And along with, I'm sure, all of our subscribers, I can't imagine any of our subscribers are like, yeah, I don't need the main channel. I'm perfectly fine with them talking about something I have no idea what they're referring to. All of our listeners, I'm sure, are subscribers of your main channel. And I think that it's a real testament to the effort and the work you've put into it. So congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's one of those, 500,000 is a number. And then you have to remember there's a human being behind every single one of those numbers. And that's when my head just starts to go, wait, what?
Yeah. Well, keep in mind, this is the internet we're talking about. So there may not, in fact, be a human behind each and every one of those. Yeah.
They could be Russian
bots.
It is
a number. So So on to the discussion. This is one of those talks where the entire point of your channel is a personal connection to technology, a desire to see the relationship between how tech can improve or impact our lives for the positive and the possibly negative. So that's already a personal thing. But this one took a step even deeper into the personal, as this is something you yourself are going to be doing.
I'm actively doing it. Yep.
The plans to build a home and looking at the various options of how to do that and wanting to do it with as much of a net zero impact as possible makes this something that, as most of the comments pointed out, people are very interested in knowing more about your experience. So some of the comments include these, like from Benjamin Davis, who wrote, "Totally love to follow your process into getting a low emissions home. I'm on the same path and would love to follow your process." Another one from Asmuk, who wrote, "I'm so glad to have found your channel. It was like discovering a similar soul with more knowledge on the topic of common interest. Right now, I have just bought a piece of land in Latvia and plan to build a house." I assume that Asmuk does not work in the Boston area as you and your family do, because that will be one hell of a commute.
Yes, that'd be a very hard commute.
But Asmuk continues, "Surely I would like to hear more about your experience in the process. Here, perfect insulation and modular homes are part of the day by day, but still have to understand fully what the options are and how to take the next steps and actually build our place."
Yeah, it's interesting because the modular homes are a lot more, same thing with passive house, are a lot more common in Europe. And they're still kind of like, they've been here in the United States for a while. They just haven't really caught on, and they're becoming a little more popular now. But it's like, I'm surprised they haven't caught on more. I think there might be a misperception as to like, oh, they're not as good quality or something like that. But they're actually better built than on-site stick-built homes in most cases. Like when you're talking about a developer that comes in and builds 50 homes and just sells them off, those are built
fairly quickly.
Very quickly and to standard, and standard is usually not very good. So these homes, like the one I'm looking at from Unity Homes, the walls are going to be basically about a foot thick and like crazy insulation and very efficient and using low emissions everything for it. So it's like the idea that you can spend just a little bit more money for like a passive house, I am going to be paying more for a modular home than I would for a stick-built house, built to standard. But if I'm trying to build a stick-built house that's passive home standard, going modular is cheaper. So it's like, it's still a pricey endeavor. I actually had somebody reach out to me and say that they were looking into doing this in their area, and they were finding $800 per square foot, which made me almost fall out of my chair, because that's just insane that it could cost $800 a square foot when a typical house might cost you $100. It's like, that's insane.
Yeah, that would be, you'd be quickly entering, I mean, for a house that would not be that big, 1,000 square foot home, you're getting close to $1 million home there.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, it also depends heavily on where you live. So like in Latvia, I'm sure he's going to have a lot more options that are even more affordable than what are to me, because I live in the Boston area, which is just where I live. Things are just expensive. So modular homes, like where our parents live, would probably be cheaper than what I'll be paying. So it's like, it's all relative, but that's part of what makes these videos difficult. Because when you talk about money, it's like, yeah, this is going to save you a lot of money and it will only cost you $500,000. And people are like, what? That's not cheap. It's like, well, maybe in your area, it might be $150,000. It's like, it depends on where you live and labor rates and all that kind of stuff. So it's tough to kind of make universal. But I'm going to try to go into more depth of not costs, but more of like why you would choose to do one thing over another as far as the technologies. I am planning more videos as I go into this, and I'm hoping to be able to do interviews with the company I'm working with, maybe even get a tour of the facility. I would love to be able to film my actual house getting built in the factory. That would be really cool.
Yeah, that would be neat.
Yeah, but we'll see.
That touches on a couple of the other questions that I noticed in the comments, like this one from Zippy the Happy Chimp. And Zippy, I'm really glad to hear that you've gotten over that depressive period that you had. Zippy writes, "Buy local," quote, buy local to save shipping costs, and, quote, home prices are tied to the local median. There are going to be break points where it ends up cheaper to buy a, for example purposes only, West Virginia home and ship it to New York as compared to buying a New York home. His then next comment is, of course, having a West Virginia manufacturer meet New York codes might be another snag. Yep. I wondered if you are aware of how vast are the different codes from state to state, and do you have those options for you? Are you potentially working with a company that might be looking at something being built in Pennsylvania or Ohio, and that being a better option than something built for you in Massachusetts?
The company I'm talking to is in New Hampshire. There seems to be, for some reason, in New England, Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont seem to have a ton of modular home companies, more than in Massachusetts itself. So the companies I've been talking to are in New Hampshire. But they're all based on the same building standards and codes. So they build stuff for here in Massachusetts all the time. So there's no disconnect there. But there would be if I was going to go down south, like into South Carolina or something like that. There is going to be a difference in code and requirements, different electrical codes, different standards as far as how the houses are built for like insulation levels. So it's like they're definitely, the further you get away from where you currently are in your climate, especially, codes shift and change. So that could be a big issue.
And this comment from John Hollowell also stood out, which is, John wrote, "So I understand that the construction garbage is significantly less at the final location, but isn't the remainder of the waste just abstracted away and still exists at the initial construction facility?
No.
I imagine there is some amount of repurposing scrap material from one house to another at the facility, but I don't think it's completely eliminated."
It's not completely eliminated, but it's far more efficient, because you think about it this way. They're building numerous houses in sequence, and if you're cutting up wood, they're doing all this in a CAD program, and so they know exactly what parts they have to build, what sizes and shapes they need, and they can figure out, okay, we're going to be cutting timber in these lengths, which means we're going to have these lengths left over, and our next project needs lengths that would fit within that, so they can plan and reuse. It's not scrap per se, but it's like they can be very efficient in how they're cutting their wood and how they're using everything down to the inch. So it's like it's literally just less scrap. There's less stuff to toss in the manufacturing process. Where it's stick built on site, there's gonna be a lot of waste.
So it's the example you're talking about would be, okay, we're making 10 houses this week, so we know that we need 1,000 pieces of wood this length, and when you cut all of the supplies that we've brought in, we're going to end up with so many pounds of excess at the end, because we will have perfectly put every cut into all of those pieces of lumber, as opposed to the on-site location where every site is on its own cutting things to the right length. Correct. And may end up with 2 or 3 times as much of the scrap at the end. Correct. Because you have multiple sites all cutting to specific lengths and ending up with scrap that they may or may not actually return to some place to be reused later.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
So it is, I like John's framing of it as the waste is abstracted away.
Yeah.
I think that is an interesting measure of how to envision what is happening, because effectively this is still construction. You are just not seeing it being done on the site. It is still the if there are hazardous materials being used in home construction, those likely could still exist in insulations and things like that might be done in a facility as opposed to on site. That's another way that you're avoiding impacting the immediate environment, of less exposure in the environment to things from when they're using saws, when they're using drills, those things just going into the air and blowing wherever. Here in the city, we've had in my immediate neighborhood, an incredible amount of construction, and every few weeks for the past couple of years during the spring and summer, it seems like that's when the weather turns nice enough that these construction sites are able to say, now we can do the the stucco exterior, which is basically paint mixed with little foam pellets. That's what gives it the texture. And it gets sprayed onto the exterior of some of these buildings. And some of those foam pellets inevitably blow away. They'll open, it's obvious somebody somewhere is opening a container that is basically, then they're mixing these two things together. And some of the foam just blows away. And we get around the neighborhood what looks like suddenly springtime and summertime snow. And it's just foam pellets. And when you think about like, well, that's not good. Who knows how much foam is just blowing around the neighborhood and around the city. And that's just, not only is it waste, it's just pollution.
Yeah.
So modular construction in a contained environment, like a construction facility, is going to help limit stuff like that. And that's
exactly
whether or not you end up with more or less scrap. That alone is a good argument for using modular homes, I think.
Yes. It's everything. It's a really good point. Everything's self-contained in the construction so that you can have better control over everything.
I was curious as I was watching this, how are some of the details that you found in your research impacting and informing your own decision-making around your own home?
That's a good question. It's originally I thought I was going to be going like a purely modular built home where they would actually just be delivering sections and then they lock the sections together, set it up, and literally the house on site, within 5 to 7 days, there's like no house there. And then suddenly there's a complete house. I was looking at that initially. But there were some things about the way the houses are constructed that gave us some restrictions as to what we could do in certain cases. And so we started drifting more towards another company called Unity, which does panelized modular homes, where it's still being built on site, but they're delivering an entire wall with the windows and everything already in it. And then they're basically putting those together, putting the roof on, and then they finish the inside of the house on site, where a lot of modular houses, when they're delivered, even the insides are done. So like the flooring's already in, the kitchen counters the kitchen, cabinets already in. This is not going to be that. And the reason we kind of drifted that direction was, for us, it was giving us the design choices. The changes we can make are a little more fit our style of what we're looking for than the modular homes, just because of the way they have to be transported restricts kind of some of the things you can do. Because you're literally putting these things on a wide load trailer kind of a thing and hauling them across state lines, where a panelized home, it's like literally going to be a stack of walls and roofs and eaves and things like that get put on a truck. And then
it's like getting a gingerbread house kit.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
does it come with frosting?
I wish it did.
Yeah.
That would
delicious.
Be awesome. Delicious icing. There'd be a lot of icing.
There would be a lot of icing. Yeah. But it's worth it. So before we tune off for this slightly abbreviated episode, simply because this is a holiday weekend and Matt and I will be, for the first time, I just realized this morning, Matt and I are going to be seeing each other this weekend. It's going to be a little family trip for my family. We're going up to Massachusetts from New York. It's going to be the first time that Matt and I are going to see each other face to face in
10 months?
18 months.
No, it hasn't been that long, because you remember you guys did stop here. We had a backyard.
9 months ago or something.
It's been like 9 or 10 months. Yeah.
It's been long enough that I can't even remember that we did that. So,
and we stayed 6 feet apart.
Yeah. It was a different era.
Yes.
Thankfully, it was a different era. Vaccines all around. But before we sign off on this episode, I wanted to very briefly bring up some news out of Canada that came across the wire a couple of days ago. And it was that Canada has decided to ban internal combustion engines by 2035. And Matt, you've talked about this potential ban in other areas, and I wanted to get your thoughts about what you think about this.
I'm very excited by this. And it's also just one of those, it makes me Welcome to America. It's like we're doing nothing. And it's like every other country in the civilized world, like everything from China to most European countries to Canada, are all basically saying we're phasing out, we're setting a deadline that you got to get out. And here's the United States, free market will figure it out. And so it's a little frustrating and embarrassing. But Canada already had set a deadline. They've moved it up, which is just, it's awesome that they're doing this. It gets me very excited. But on the flip side, I'm a little torn because it's like, at this point, I don't think it matters if the United States does it or not. Because there are, like I said, China, biggest country in the world, with most of Europe and Canada now. We're going to get dragged along whether we want to or not. So it's like every car company, the writing is on the wall. They have to go EV. So it's like, at this point, if we do it, it's not going to make a difference because we are following pretty much every other country that's already kind of setting the agenda. So
I think for me, it's one of those ironies that the argument about the free market turns out to be right, but for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
Rather than our political environment being one where we boldly lead in this and say, here's the restrictions that we're going to put in place. We say, no, the free market will figure it out. And then the free market does figure it out because countries like China place these restrictions before we do. And the market for the ICE vehicles does finally bottom out because of governmental action in other places. And it's a lack of, to me, it strikes me as just a lack of moral fortitude to do the right thing. It's the continuation of, if we just bury our heads in the sand long enough and pretend that certain things aren't happening, then we don't have to do anything until capitalism fixes it. And
what I do find funny about all these restrictions, though, is by 2035, when most of them start, by that point, electric vehicles will be demonstrably cheaper than gasoline cars. And so at that point, if you're a human being that's still buying a gasoline car, there's something wrong with the way you're thinking. Because it's like, it's going to be one of those, you either have a very specific need or you just haven't done the math, because it's by that point, it's going to make financial sense just to get an EV over pretty much anything else, because they'll be so much cheaper.
There were people, I'm sure, who were like, I'll be daggum in the ground before I buy a vehicle that's not a horse and buggy. And there will be people who will say, I am going to make sure that I'm standing by this mode of transportation because it means something to me. And for those people, I have a feeling there will be some kinds of exemptions for like classic vehicles for people who are car aficionados, and
of course,
and there will be the ability to the cost and maintenance of these things will skyrocket. You know, if you have a 1930s Ford, it's going to cost you an arm and a leg to keep that thing in running condition, because you're going to have specific things manufactured just for you. Eventually, a 2020 gas vehicle, it will be something comparable. There will be people 50 years from now who will have what is now a new car that they're trying to continue as a classic vehicle. It'll just be more expensive for them to maintain it.
It's going to be like vinyl records. It's like 99% of the market is all digital music. It's like, but there's still that 1% of the aficionados that like the sound of a record. It's like, it's going to be the same thing. They'll be around, and there's no problem at that point. It's like, have fun with your gas car. It's like, we're talking about, we need to get 99% of the people off of gas.
And of course, the bigger issue is not just the vehicles. It's all the other ways that our electricity is manufactured, and moving away from use of coal and other fossil fuels, burning them exclusively as the means of producing electricity.
Yep.
So our listeners should let us know what they think. What do you think about the modular home revolution that Matt is slowly, hesitantly tiptoeing into? And will you be interested in hearing more from him about his experience? And also let us know, are you currently in the process of doing this yourself? Have you had this experience? And do you have any wisdom to impart on Matt? Like, they fall apart without frosting. Let us know what you think. You can find the contact information in the podcast description. And of course, on YouTube, that's in the comments section directly below this video. And now, because of the quality of my camera, you can see my finger. We do have ways to support the podcast. There is, of course, subscribing. There's sharing us with your friends. There's leaving reviews and comments. And you can also visit stilltbd.fm, and you'll see the support the podcast link there. You can throw some coins in our jar. We appreciate whatever kind of support you're able to give. Please be sure to give this episode a rating, a review, and share it with your friends. All of those things really do help the podcast. The podcast helps the channel helps Matthew, and then Matthew has to get working on that frosting. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. Thanks so much for listening.